to today, in partnership with Lydian. I think it's important, before we start today's presentation, to talk a little bit about, what Readyedgego is and why we're even here in the first place. 10 years ago, I started this company to really shed light on the admissions process because it just turns out to be really stressful and an incredibly opaque, place, right? Families who want, the best for their children to go to schools like Berkeley or LA or Stanford have very little answers as to what those schools even look for. And, when you ask those universities what they look for, they're very, very ambiguous about it, right? They tell you things like it's the holistic review process. They say it's not just your numbers, it's all these other things. But when you press them on that, they tell you very little. So I think today, in partnership with Lydian, it's really about shedding light as to how that process works. Both Julian and I have reviewed candidates internally for various universities, myself at Berkeley, primarily at least in this room right now from the UC system, but our whole team has done admissions for private schools as well, from USC to out-of-state publics like Texas system. So we really know ins and outs of pretty much how college admissions works across the board, whether students are going for small liberal arts schools or very large public ones. I think the goal today is really to shed light, broken into two parts, right? I think Julian's going to cover from his experience working in admissions, advising students and their families. What are the top three areas that he really wants to emphasize from his experience reading applications? And then I'll go into, from my 10 years of experience advising students and families, the three, I would say, greatest takeaways, right? The three greatest tips to really improve a child's chances at all of their colleges. That's really the whole purpose, is to, open up more doors for students. And that's what it's all about. Hopefully it starts with today, and we'll come back in the summer and really get into the nitty gritties of essay writing. That's something that Julian and I live in. We breathe it. We just got done with the season over here, and our students are seeing phenomenal results. And it's just a great process that we've been able to refine over a decade now. So anyway, Readyedgego has been around for a decade, right? 10 years, and we've maintained 100% success rate in terms of placing students to target schools or better. And our kids come from all over the globe now, as far away as Singapore, Shanghai, Japan, India, Europe, as well as across the States and New York and, obviously San Francisco Bay Area. And so my background, having, it's kind of nonlinear, but I've worked 16 years in education, 10 years in college admissions, having gone to Berkeley myself. I just really wanted to solve this problem of guidance or lack thereof. And I found so much along the way that I'd love to share with you guys today. Julian, also having done admissions at UC system, can shed a lot of light, from his own perspective. So really excited to share everything that we can. It's really, you can think of it as like, probably 20 plus years of collective wisdom. And you're about to hear some of the best that we can put together in this today's presentation. And we also did want to highlight, at the end of it, I think a tool that we're actually providing to all Lydian families for free. And it's actually our technology that actually can measure your qualification, not just numerically, but also qualitatively through the activities that your students have been involved in. So that can be an incredible force multiplier in terms of your insight and clarity as to how to improve your profile towards any kind of college, whether it's Amherst or UC Santa Barbara or whatnot. Without further ado, I'm going to let Julian take it away, and he'll take on the first half and talk about the three primary points of insight that he's learned from the admissions process.
And Julian, before you start, I'm sorry, I'm just going to butt in for one quick second and I'll stop talking. I just threw into the chat a reminder to everybody that's on the call. If we want to use the chat feature just to park questions, like if you hear Julian and Dan talking tonight and a question pops up, feel free to park it in the chat. We'll get to the questions when there's time for FAQs and things. But I just wanted to let people know that's fine. And Elizabeth George, my colleague, and I can sort of moderate it. But hope that's okay, Dan and Julian. I just wanted people to know if they want to drop a question in there, because you say something that primes something, that way they don't forget their question, they can just park it there.
Perfect.
Yeah. Absolutely. So as Dan said, my name is Julian. It's very nice to meet everybody. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having us. And I graduated from UCLA. Just a little bit about me. I've been doing college admissions for almost 4 years now. I've had experience in high school back where I live in Southern California. And I also do admissions. This is, I believe, my 4th year doing admissions reading for one of the UCs. And so that's just a little bit about me. And the topics that I want to go over today that I've found to be very important in the college admissions process would be number one, we're going to go over high school context. So I'm going to explain what that is, what that means, why it's important. And I will also be doing talking about activities, extracurriculars, volunteering, and longevity in those activities, why that's important. And finally, strategic course selection and why that is also very, very, very important in the college application process. So without further ado, let's just get straight into it. We'll start with high school context. So this is an area that a lot of people sometimes hear about, but they don't necessarily know exactly what it is or why it's used in college admissions. Now, I found particularly for this year that it's been very important. So what exactly is high school context? High school context pretty much refers to opportunities that are available to students from their respective high schools. So what exactly does that mean? What does that entail? That entails pretty much academics, extracurriculars, and resources. So given the area that your school, your high school is in, what were your academics like? What extracurriculars were offered to your student? What resources were provided to your students? So did I have a lot of AP and honors and weighted courses that I'm able to take? Or were there extracurriculars that I was able to be a part of and I was able to take advantage of? Or did I not necessarily have those opportunities available to me in my high school? So basically how it works is that each school is given a score, and that score ranges from 0 to 100. So what in the world do 0 and 100 and everything in between mean? 0, anything from, I would say, 0 to maybe 20 means that there's an exceptional amount of opportunity offered at my school. So I have academics that I can take. I have areas where I can excel. I have support. I have extracurriculars. I have everything available to me in my reach that will help me succeed. And then 100, which is the maximum, is there's extremely limited, if at all, any opportunity that's offered at my school. So maybe I'm in a high school that's in a horrible area where there's no way for me to get any support whatsoever. So we're really looking at students and we're seeing where they're coming from and what they've done, what they've achieved in the context of their high school. So did I do a lot of activities if I'm from a school that's in an affluent area that's, you know, has a lot of opportunity? Or am I doing well in a school that comes from very limited resources? And then everything in between there is kind of there's some opportunity, but there's not a lot. So here are some really good examples that I'm just going to share with you of how this kind of plays out in admission. So in example A, if your school is scored, say, a 10, that means that your student has plenty of opportunities to excel and challenge themselves academically, get involved in extracurricular and volunteer opportunities, and ultimately be successful. So what do I mean by excel and challenge yourselves academically? That just means that I'm taking advantage of the weighted courses that are offered to me. I'm taking advantage of the rigorous courses. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to take 30 or 40 AP and honors courses, but it just means that we as admissions want to see if you have that opportunity that you're taking it. If you have clubs, if you have volunteer opportunities, we want to see that you're putting yourself out there and that you're contributing to society, that you're not just, you know, a one note and all you're doing are taking advanced courses. Then you have, on the other hand, high school B, who scored a 95, which means that they have extremely limited opportunities. And this includes limited opportunity to excel or challenge yourselves. I've seen this very often. A high school that is scored a 95 or 100 in terrible areas, and they have no weighted courses to take. They have no APs, they have no honors. These students have no ability to challenge themselves. And guess what? That means that we as admissions can't fault them, because that's not their fault that they didn't have any opportunity available to them. That's unfortunately just part of the context of where they're from. That also means limited extracurricular and volunteer. So if you're at a school that is scored a 95, we're assuming and we think that there probably wasn't a lot of opportunity out there for you. And we're pretty much, and it's not to say that a student shouldn't be doing any volunteering. So if I see a student that's from a school with a 95, but I see 0 opportunities, still a question mark for me, because even if you're in that area, if you're in that context, it doesn't mean that you have to have, a crazy amount of opportunities, but it also doesn't mean that you're able to have 0. So you should still have some opportunity. You just don't need you don't need as much opportunity, because we as readers understand that you might be in an area where there's high violence and crime rates. San Bernardino is a perfect example of that. Schools out there have it's a very dangerous area. A lot of students don't have a lot of opportunity out there. And this is really important when it comes to students, especially who are in affluent areas, who do tend to be from high schools that score very high. So of course, just because you go to a school that's, scored a 10, we don't want to see a sea of activities. We don't need to see that you're doing, the whole 9 yards, but we want to see that you're taking advantage of what's there for you and that you're taking advantage of the rigor. Just like in a school where you're at a high school of a 95, even if it is a 95, I personally would like to see, and I've seen this before, that you as a student are, if you have no weighted courses, you're taking a dual enrollment course, or you're going to another high school to take an AP or weighted course. And that happens very often. So students have these opportunities. We just want to see that you're taking advantage of what is there for you. And if you're taking advantage, that is definitely a good sign for us. So, and again, like I said, you don't have to, if you're in an affluent area, it doesn't mean that you have to be in 20 to 30 opportunities, but we do like to see that you're involved and that you are challenging yourself. And why this matters, why it's important, is ultimately it gives admissions, it gives each student a fair chance at gaining admission to the school that they want to attend based on their unique circumstances. So again, if you're in a dangerous area filled with crime and your high school is a 95, we necessarily can't fault you, because that's unfortunately it's not our fault, and it's not your fault either. And also at the end of the day, it also provides insight into a student's key attributes, be it dedication, motivation, and persistence. Why? Because say, for example, you're in a school that's a 10, but you're taking a good amount of weighted courses. You're taking advantage of what's there for you. You're being motivated to succeed. You're motivated to do these opportunities. We like to see that you're involved. It goes the same way for a student that's going with a score of 95 in a very, dangerous area, or a school that doesn't have much resources. If you're dedicating yourself to academics, even if you don't have those weighted courses, if you're taking them into community college, if you're taking them somewhere else, we love to see that. We love to see your motivation and your persistence to succeed, even through challenges.
One thing to add.
Yes, go ahead.
No, I just have to add that I think, especially in today's current time, to talk about COVID for a quick second, in terms of high school context, in the context of COVID, Julian and I talk about this all the time, but oftentimes students, use what we call the COVID crutch. We understand that COVID limited opportunities for a lot of students. We get it, right? But at the same time, that you can't use that as a pass for, too long, right? You can't just say for the rest of the high school, oh, well, due to COVID, I didn't do anything. Because, over here, we found that, there are some students who are very active during COVID, right? They found virtual opportunities to stay involved in people's lives, be it here or even Ukraine, for instance, right? And so you can't just utilize COVID as the context for a crutch to say, oh, I didn't do anything because of COVID, right? And I think the second thing is, in general, we do hear a lot of questions about, okay, well, how often are we compared, let's say from, in the prior two examples of A versus B. I would say in general, right, the way college admissions works is we like to compare you against your immediate peer group first and foremost, right? So, you're usually, if you go to, let's say, an affluent school or neighborhood, right, you're not immediately compared against, I would say, kids from completely wildly different neighborhoods, right? And so, it's your first and immediate peer group is what you're going to be compared against, right? So don't worry too much about, oh, well, right, just because a student goes to a poor neighborhood, they have an advantage, right? That's not how it works. It's no, we look at, for the most part, right, we look at, okay, well, where did you come from? And let's see what else, what other students from that same place did, right? In terms of the activities, in terms of the academic rigor, in terms of the classes, and the grades that they earned. And usually when we do compare, I think students who come from different neighborhoods, different backgrounds, different context scores, it's usually when we're really trying to find the final ones for that single spot or two that we're that it's coming down to, right? But even then, right, it's rare that we have to like compare students, because that's now we're comparing apples with oranges, and we try to avoid those situations altogether. Yeah.
Right. And one more thing to add about COVID is I 100% agree with that. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen on an admissions essay, what was your most significant challenge? COVID/distance learning. Please don't do that. Please don't write about that. Because the reason being is because we as admission readers understand, and we know that that was a challenge. So think bigger, think broader, think being more personal. That's what's important. And that's of course for a later date when it comes to essays. But so this is just something to think about when you're thinking about potentially what is my high school context? What should I be doing as of right now? Because if you're not involved, or if you're not, challenging yourself, it's a good opportunity to start doing that. And that actually goes pretty well into the next discussion of longevity and finding meaningful activities. So it's really important for students to seek activities and opportunities that you're genuinely interested in and passionate about. Key words, passionate about, because there are so many times where a student is, they have all of these activities and all of these things they've done, but guess what? They have no meaning, number one, or number two, they have no longevity. So you do band for a year and then you quit, and then you do choir for a year and then you quit. That's great, you're exploring, but also you're not finding any meaning in your activities. So then we question, well, how dedicated were you? And that's really important when you're thinking of the activities and when you're thinking of opportunities, is we want to see your commitment to these activities that you're doing. We want to see that it means something to you, that you're not just trying to accumulate 500 hours of community service, because it's more than that. Of course, you can have community service, but if you're just doing it to rack hours, you're never going to find meaning in your activities. And that's why it's so important. There's so many aspects to finding these meaningful activities and finding and doing things for longer than a year. So ideally, when I'm looking at a student's activity, and when most admissions readers are, we like to see at least 2 years minimum, because if you just do something for a year and then quit, well, then we think, well, what happened? What happened to the activity? And of course, we understand COVID. We know that with those activities, some of them only lasted a year. So that we get, but there are still other volunteer opportunities that can be done for more than a year and should be done for more than a year. And that's volunteering, extracurriculars, anything that's going to bring meaning to the student's life, if you will. So I'm going to go over 2 different examples, and I want to show you kind of a comparison, and then we'll go into why this is important. So my first example is example A, and we have student A who has 500 hours of community service through Interact Club. That's a good club to do. Mostly one-day activities such as food drives, park cleanups, and parades. And they've also done choir for a year. Okay, so far so good, sounds pretty good. Then you have example B, a student who has 200 hours of community service, clearly significantly less. And they are doing activities in which they're working with students with learning disabilities. They are working with the elderly in hospice with cognitive issues. They've also been in the marching and symphonic band throughout high school. So they haven't done as much. They don't have as many hours, but they're doing some activities, right? They're doing a few. So I'm looking at these 2 students and I think to myself, well, which student has done more? And I think initially we might think, well, probably the student who has 500 hours. But plot twist, it's a student with 200 hours. And why? Because they have meaning in their activities. Those activities seem meaningful because they've had longevity in them. They were in marching band and symphonic band throughout high school. So clearly I know that marching band and symphonic band is something important to that student. It means something to them. It shows that there is persistence because marching band is not easy. Doing marching band after school every single day. Now, of course, I'm not telling you to have your student join marching band, but it's just an example of this student is really going through it and they're really taking the time to find longevity in their activities, as opposed to student A who had 500 hours of community service, which is commendable. But if they're only one-day activities, what was the meaning? Why did you do those activities? Did they change you in any way? Did they challenge your life in any way? How did that change your life? And trust me, I see both of these types of students all the time. Students all the time, right? I have 500 hours of community service, and that's wonderful, but then there's not much meaning. And that's because normally when you have those 500 hours of community service, you're usually in clubs like Interact or Key Club, which are fine, but there's not necessarily much meaning to those activities. And that's especially because they're only one-day activities. And that's where students fall short, because then they do this thing for one day and then surprise, it's over. And then you say, now what do I do? Now what was the meaning behind that? And they can't find the meaning.
And I just have to add, we vet for that meaning on essays, right? Ultimately, we see it both on the activities list on the college application, which is equivalent to like a resume. But, so when a student has to write about an activity in 350 or 500 words, right? That's where we can really detect whether this was meaningful or not for a student. And, I think a lot of parents ask, well, how do you even tell, right? How do you even vet for something as ambiguous as meaning? Let me just say, for a trained eye who's read essays for the past 10 years and applications, it's very, very easy to see, an activity that was clearly impactful for a student versus one that was more so done, basically out of self-interest, right, to make one look better. So I just wanted to add that it's the essays that reveal a lot of this to us.
Dan and Julian, can I ask a question? This is maybe a good point for me to ask.
Yes.
You're talking about school scores and talking about opportunities for students to get involved and, comparing these student A, student B examples. It strikes me that while Lydian Academy is 2 campuses, have ample opportunities for kids to take honors and AP courses in high school. We have a pretty robust offering. So you could argue, yes, you can challenge yourself academically. There are more limited extracurricular and co-curricular opportunities. There's a couple clubs, but there's not, like when I worked in Palo Alto School District, there was, at that high school campus, there was probably 250 club options, right? So there's a lot to choose from. At Lydian, you might have 2, right? So as I'm thinking about this for our students, do they have an opportunity, because the school is more limited in the extracurricular, to do things like in that summer time frame or outside of the formal school process that would show the colleges, even though your school is more limited in terms of those extracurricular offerings, it says something about you as a student that you're getting involved in your community, or like in the summer, you're taking advantage of this co-curricular option or this internship. Does my question make sense? Like, can they not somehow use that like in their favor, but in a way, it's not their fault that they're going to have more limited options at the school site, right? But I'm thinking, why not leverage that? If that's the case, get involved in something outside of school. And I'm just wondering, from your perspective, like, how do admissions readers look at that? Does my question make sense? I don't know if I'm thinking about that correctly, but
Absolutely. And I think you nailed it in the head at the end. I would say Lydian students are actually at a strategic advantage because the extracurricular opportunities are limited on campus, right? The little that you do or the lot that you do outside of campus just sets you apart that much more, right, from your immediate peer group, right? And this is something that I'll be covering in my portion, right, which is ultimately how to think about life outside of school, right? Because I do think that a lot of learning and a lot of profile building has to happen outside of class, right? And I'll break that down in great detail. But I do think that, another thing to mention here though is like, okay, without a doubt, right? I would say, it will be assumed, I think, that students generally who go to Lydian have opportunities outside of class, right? So, or rather off campus. So I do think that, there is definitely going to be an expectation for them to have explored, opportunities that weren't immediately at Lydian. Yeah, so I'll talk about the ins and outs of how to go about that though.
And I also want to just, make sure that everybody understands when I'm talking about high school context, I don't want you to think, oh my gosh, all I need to do are things on campus, because it's bigger than that.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to see that you're only involved in on-campus activities. You can be a part of 10 different clubs, right? You can be a part of them. You can be the president of the clubs, and that's wonderful, but we also want to see more.
Mm-hmm.
We want to see what you've done for your community. So it's bigger than just school activities, because a student can be a part of, say, for example, the history club, but they only meet once a week and there's no meaning to that. So maybe it teaches them a little bit about history, but there's not much of a story there when it comes to an essay and what they've done and what they experienced. So it's really important for students to get out into the community and find where their passions lie outside of school.
Yeah.
So it's a lot bigger than just on campus. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it's a good idea to be on campus, but even better to go outside of school and look for those activities.
It's both, right?
Yes.
Ultimately, right? And we want to see that a student can make, an impact. And I'll use that. I'll come back to the I word later, but
Mm-hmm.
we want to see impact in their own immediate school community, but also in the broader and greater community, right? Ultimately. So it's both. Yeah.
And so just finishing up on longevity of activities. So why is it important? It allows admissions readers to see where your passions and interests lie, which is kind of just like what we were talking about. Number two, it allows you to grow as an individual. So maybe you didn't realize that you were passionate about helping underserved populations, but then you did one community service activity and now you realized that's what you want to do. That's where your passion lies. So exploration is always important because it shows you and it allows you to learn more about yourself and other people, other cultures, other people's experiences. So when you're exploring activities, have an open mind. And last, which is also what we discussed, it offers ample opportunity to create meaningful and powerful college essays. So if you do 500 hours of community service, but you only did one-day activities, guess what? When you get to your essay, you're going to say, uh-oh, I don't remember really what I did because they were all one-day activities and they weren't very meaningful. But if you've done something for 3 years, a volunteering activity or an extracurricular, you're going to say, you know what? That activity was so meaningful to me because ABC, and it taught me the values of ABC. And this is why I am who I am today. And boom, there's your essay. So make sure that you're really you're thinking about activities that are going to be beneficial to you. Think about activities, causes that you're passionate about and how you can help those vulnerable communities, vulnerable populations, or how you can make a change in society. And make sure there's longevity in them. Do them for 2-3 years. Find the meaning for yourself and find the meaning for the bigger picture when you're thinking about activities. And then the last area that I'd like to cover is strategic course selection. Now, this tends to be an area where students hiccup a lot. And so what do I mean by strategic course selection? You need to be very mindful when selecting courses, especially weighted courses. Now, it sounds like Lydian has a plethora of AP and honors courses that they offered, which is wonderful. But be careful with how many that you choose, because you run the line of overwhelming yourself if you have too many AP and honors courses, and then that leaves you no room for other important aspects. So when it comes to strategic course selection, you want to select courses that will challenge you. So of course, take weighted courses, take courses that are going to challenge you, that you will do well in, that you're genuinely passionate about, and that you can do well in. 2, courses that will allow you to explore your academic interests. If you don't necessarily know what you want to major in, start exploring now. Take the time to explore. but be mindful of the weighted courses that you take, because if you're not particularly interested in US history and you take AP US history, you might not necessarily like that course. And if you don't like a course, you're not going to like studying. And if you don't like studying for that course, you're not going to do well in the course, and it's going to hurt your GPA. So it's really important to be really mindful when you're selecting the specific courses that you want to take. And you want to take courses that will prepare you for your planned major. This is extremely important. If you're planning on doing biology and you're set 100% on biology, I hope that you're taking AP Bio. I hope that you're taking courses in the sciences, anatomy honors, physiology honors. I'm hoping that you're taking these weighted courses and that you're not leading to missed opportunities when you should be exploring your interests. So when you have the major that you want in mind, you want to make sure that you are strategically planning your course load so that you're not overwhelming yourself with courses that aren't necessarily going to prepare you for your major, and with courses that will be preparing you for your major. So a lot of students say this all the time: well, everybody else is taking that weighted course, so I should take it. Or everybody else says that it's a good idea, and I think the teacher is easy. Well, pump the brakes. So just because everybody else is taking it doesn't mean that you should be taking it. Just because it might be easy for your friend doesn't mean that it's going to be easy for you. Mm-hmm. So it's really important that you're taking courses that you're genuinely interested in and that you know that you can do well in, because it dictates a lot when we're looking at your college application. So we're going to go into 3 different examples. And I want to show you kind of the implications of what happens here when we're looking at admissions. And these examples that I'm showing happen all the time, all the time. So example A is you have a student who's applying as an English literature major. In 9th grade, they took 2 weighted courses and they ended with a 3.9. Good stuff. Then in 11th, they said, uh-oh, all my friends are taking APs, and they took 5 weighted courses, and they've never taken that many before. And then, they received a C in AP English, in history, and even in a dual enrollment college course. And you're going into an English literature major. Oh, yikes. That's a little worrisome. Then you have example B, a student who's applying as an engineering major, and they've taken some weighted courses, but most are in English and history. And in 10th, they opted to take regular chemistry, and in 11th, anatomy honors. Interesting. And then in C, you have a student who's applying as a bio major. And throughout high school, they enrolled in a good amount of weighted courses, including bio, chemistry, English honors, AP bio, AP chemistry, environmental science, and psychology. Not in all the same years, but strategically 10th and 11th grade, where they put, I'll take 3 weighted courses in 10th and I'll take 3 weighted courses in 11th. But look at the student C, example C. They're taking courses that are preparing them for biology. They're not taking AP US history. They're not taking AP European because they don't necessarily matter to them. And maybe they're not necessarily the greatest at history. But then you look at student B, who is doing engineering, and there's all these missed opportunities, right? They should have been in AP chemistry. If their school offered AP computer science, they should have taken computer science. They should have been taking the courses that are important to their major. And then you have example A, where this student should have been doing well in English courses and history courses, but because they took too many weighted courses, they got overwhelmed. And when they got overwhelmed, they started to forget that they had assignments in English, or they started to not have time to do their work for English because they were too focused on getting an A in AP physics, because that class was really challenging for them and they had to try harder in that class. Therefore, they didn't have much time for English. So as you can see, it's really important that you're strategically choosing the courses that you're taking for that specific major that you're interested in. So, and why it's important is admissions, as you can see, we like to see that you've challenged yourself and you've had some preparation for your intended major. Now, I don't want you to think that, like, say, for example, you want to do philosophy. Okay, so we understand that a lot of high schools don't have philosophy courses, and that's fair. So we're not necessarily looking for philosophy, but we're looking for courses related to philosophy. We're looking for summer programs where maybe you've done some sort of exploration in philosophy, or maybe you've done some personal research. So even though your course or your school might not have those courses that are specific to your major, there are still ways to explore them. And if we don't see rigor, we question how well you are prepared for college level coursework. So if I see that you've taken 2 honors and they're only courses that don't apply to your major, I think, well, I don't know how well they're going to be able to do when it comes to college level courses if you haven't had experience in them. And then if we don't see major preparation, we question your genuine interest and or knowledge of your intended major. So if I see that you have psychology, but you have you've shown no interest in your application whatsoever, be it through courses, summer programs, I say, well, I'm a little confused. So how did they come to the conclusion that they want to do psychology as opposed to the student who I read right before you, who also was psychology, who took AP Psych, did a summer program in Psych, did math courses, did neuroscience? I think, well, they clearly were on the path that they knew. So again, super important when it comes to course selection. And the most important keyword is balance, finding the balance between your honors and your regular courses, and trying to only take the courses that are important to you or that matter to you or that you will do well in. So with all of those being said, that is my portion, and we're going to jump right into Dan's unless Dan would like anything else to add.
Yeah, no, this is, it's really about the basics, and I think course selection, I'm really happy that Julian brought this up because I think it's the one thing that students and parents mess up on way too often. If there is one thing I noticed that students, like families, really mess up on, it's this. And what they mess up on is there tends to be this overemphasis on academic performance, right? I think in this society that's very data centric, right? If you can measure it, if you can see a number behind it, we tend to place more validity to it, right? It's like, well, a B is a B and A is an A, right? And so as a result, what I've kind of found is like families spend and students spend 80, 90, sometimes 100% of their time and their resources, be it money, be it time, any resource, on academics. And then what happens is the opportunity cost that comes is huge, right? When it comes to the activities, right? So going back and synthesizing what Julian says, if there's one way to think about it, it's very simple. And one may think that I'm being like too simple on this, but let me just tell you guys, it's actually quite spot on. It's 50-50. I'd say admissions, when they look at course selection and academic performance, that's roughly speaking about 50% of how we're weighting that candidate's preparedness, right? The other 50% is everything else, right? Specifically, guys, like I would say the qualities are love of learning, right? What intellectual curiosity has this student demonstrated outside of those classes? Demonstrated concern for others, right? Which is the sense of community, sense of involvement. And lastly, leadership potential, right? And you can only fill that half of the cup, right, if you get involved outside of class. But what I see way too often is if it's 50-50, but families are spending 90+% of their time on academics, you just simply won't have enough time to develop the student elsewhere. And and oftentimes when families find out about that other 50%, it's too late, right? There's very little wiggle room. So, and that's really my portion of the presentation today, which is talking about, well, how does that other 50 really work? How do we even, how do we look at that, right? And I think I just wanted to just, really, really, if there's one thing I want everyone to remember today, it's that weightage, right? And so it almost requires a paradigm shift. It's like, okay, if I'm spending this amount of time and resources on academics, how do I balance that out with showing also well-roundedness in my students, right? And I think that's what separates the American education system from the rest of the world. It actually values well-roundedness in a human being more than it does straight GPA, straight number, straight test score, right? And I think that's what makes college admissions here so confusing to understand, right? It's like, well, how do they even measure things like leadership? How do you measure things like love of learning, right? So I'll break that down as much as I can in my slides. And so let's get into it, yeah. before I get into mine, I just wanted to kind of highlight what we highlight here for our students at Readyedgego. Right? There are three what we call golden quality attributes. And I want you to really, really, really pay attention to them. It's not about necessarily what you do, right? Not about what activities you do, what clubs you join, what you did for volunteering. It's more so about how they demonstrate key quality attributes. Whether you're looking at UT Austin, UMich Ann Arbor, or you're looking at Boston University or Amherst or Swarthmore or UC Berkeley or UCLA, if you look at the top 150 or 200 universities on anyone's list, could be US News, Forbes, Fisk Guide, it doesn't matter, right? These three quality attributes weigh very heavily on that remaining 50%. In fact, think about them as each worth a third, right, of what's left. And I would say that's one, love of learning, right? What has a student done to really demonstrate their intellectual curiosities outside of class, right? And that can take form in so many different ways, right? But show me that you're curious outside of class and that you're not just depending on school, right, to learn. Number two is demonstrate a concern for others, right? Specifically, here's a very specific example. University of California system asks on prompt number 7, what have you done to make your community a better place? Not how many community service hours have you earned? Not what did you earn the Presidential Gold Award for service, right? No, it's what have you done concretely to make your community a better place, right? So we're looking for how have you demonstrated your natural concern for other people, right? Outside of just yourself. And lastly, what leadership potential have you exhibited, right? Prompt number 1, in case you guys are curious, right? University of California, describe an example of your leadership experience in which you contributed a positive influence, in a leadership experience over time, right? So we're looking for substance here. And I think, if you were to take away 3 quality attributes from today, so I think we covered a lot about high school context and the numbers, and I think Julian touched on longevity of activities, but now let's really start talking about, well, what exactly are we looking for in those activities, right? And it's those 3 things: love of learning, leadership, and demonstrated concern. And the first thing I want to kind of, share is this main learning that I've worked with some of the top students in the world, literally from the world. And I've worked with, students who didn't think they ever had a shot at college, right? And over at this point, 10 plus years of advising all kinds of students, here's kind of what I found. The first thing that I try to inspire upon students is to stop competing. And that's what I love about Lydian so much, by the way. I think Lydian is designed to really help a student find really their self-actualization, right? Their sense of belonging. But, I do think that we live in a very strange world, right? It's always about competition and, selectivity and acceptance rates and capitalism. And, I think something that we need to tell our students more of is let's stop being a competitor. Let's start being a contributor instead. When we work with students here in 9th and 10th grade, we help them even in their way they think about themselves. The first thing we do, right? Which is, a lot of students, I think at this age, they assume that they're still just learning and that they can't really contribute that much. And it's so far from the truth, right? I mean, being a teenager, we've learned, I think teenagers are very, very intelligent. They're very, very resourceful, right? And I think if you just show them how they can really make an impact on their community, right? And they have that buy-in, they'll go do it. They'll do some amazing things. And that's my bullet point number 2 is, well, start with, what does a student care about? What are the students' values, right? How can they see themselves contributing in their immediate community? And I'm serious. I mean, it might be so small as, I had a student who noticed that it was really dark at night and no one can see the stop signs, and it was posing a public health risk. People would be out walking with their dogs, and there were stories of people who were running the stop sign because it was so dark, right? And literally, what students, which student ultimately has the initiative, right, to try to light up that stop sign, right? And the truth is, this is a true story, okay? Student said, you know what, I'm going to see if I can make this safer, right? And that's, from that, a beautiful project was born, right? In coordination with the city where the student lived, and some resourceful engineering technology, for the cost of, I think it was $20 or $30 using an Arduino kit and some solar tech, was able to light up that stop sign, right? I think we just need to start asking ourselves, what can I do for my community right now? And the simplest question you can ask your student is, hey, if you were to basically fix any 3 things in the world, What would those three things be and why? Well, the next step is let's go do it. No matter the skill, let's go do it, right? And so I think that's the last point here is, it takes a lot of courage to actually just do it. But the students that I found to be not just the most successful when it comes to getting into the best colleges, but the most happy and fulfilled were the ones who stopped competing, right? They let everyone else do the competitions, and they were out actually trying to be inventive and do things that actually immediately help their communities, and those made for some amazing stories and interviews. I've interviewed on behalf of Berkeley as well. And, when you hear those stories, it just lights up your day. Next slide, please. And the second thing I'd say is, this is something that, going back to the I word I mentioned earlier, is impact, right? You can also, show that. I think when it comes to specifically leadership, let me focus in on this a little bit. If the past slide was about demonstrated concern for others, right? This one's about leadership. A lot of kids, they start nonprofits because they want to say that they started a nonprofit. A lot of kids will start a club because they want to say they were the president of a club. Well, let me just tell you something. We don't care. Right? We really could care less. Right? What we want to see ultimately is, what impact did you have on others tangibly, and what impact did that have on you? Right? And let me go one step deeper here, right? Oftentimes, no, not often, I think anytime, in order to make an impact on oneself or other people, there has to be some kind of challenge. There is no such thing as leadership without some felt impacts by others. And there is no such thing as leadership without some leadership challenge. Think about all of the greatest leaders that you can come up with in any period of time, right? There was formidable challenges. Right? And there was an eventual impact, right? And that's how we have come to remember the leadership examples that we know today. I find too often that students go for the title, and they don't really try to challenge the status quo. They don't really try to make it a lasting impact. And so I just, it's something that it's kind of a secret that I've learned is, the students that really impress us are the ones who ultimately left something there for everyone, and it's undeniable, right? And I just want to kind of point out a simple example. Imagine a student who started something but didn't make an impact. How far do you think they're going to get in the college application essay? Probably no more than 40, 50 words. There's only so many times you can say, I was the president of XYZ club, right? But if the student, and that's the beauty of it. I've seen students who didn't have titles, where there was no captain of the team, where there was, maybe the president was the problem of the club, and a general member or a general teammate just stepped up to the plate and really, really exuded leadership and tried to actually make an impact, a positive impact, right? That's ultimately the kind of stuff that we're looking for, right? Because we're looking for people ultimately who are going to go out into the world and not be too concerned about titles, but really be concerned about making the world a slightly better place. And we need a lot more of those. Right? So how do you basically, if you're looking for leadership opportunities, this is kind of counterintuitive. I would say stop. Rather, right, it kind of goes hand in hand with the last point, which is ultimately ask yourself first, how can you contribute to your local community? Because I think contributing to your local community immediately opens up leadership opportunities as a byproduct. Whereas I think students who try to look for leadership opportunities end up not finding anything leadership at all, right? Because it's very contrived and very superficial, okay? And so the last point I want to make here is, and go to it, and this I think is a great way to wrap it up, and kind of goes back to what Jonathan posed earlier, which is listen to what Mark Twain said, right? Which is, don't let school get in the way of your education. The whole point of this is, guys, the students that I remember the most are the ones who literally did a lot and probably much of their learning outside of class. They're the ones who didn't basically rely or depend on their education. And the first example might baffle you, but let me just tell you right now, one of college admission's favorite questions nowadays, especially at private schools, is what are the last books you've read over the summers, right? Many of the nation's top universities are research universities. That's not a secret, right? We understand they do research, right? So let me just pose a simple question to you, right? If a student doesn't like to read, how are they going to show preparedness for something like research, which requires thousands of pages of reading, right? And oftentimes students, when they're asked what books have you read, the latest books you read, we usually hear the same things: Great Gatsby, Lord of the Flies, The Crucible, stuff that's required, right? To Kill a Mockingbird. Students nowadays don't even read anymore, right? What most of them are usually on their phones, right? They're on TikTok, they're on Instagram, they're on Snapchat, they're on YouTube, they're on Netflix watching Bridgerton. And the truth is, one of the easiest ways to set yourself apart from everyone else is just to read. I'm not making this up, right? If you can reference authors, titles of books, magazines, New Yorker, whatever, on your essays or interviews with alumni at universities, that is very impressive. You're already in a group of students, right? A very small minority of students who can actually do that, right? And it's very surprising to me. Sometimes, a student will say they're interested in, say, psychology, and I'll ask them, well, do you follow any authors or have any books to recommend? And they say no. It's like, how can you say you're possibly that interested in something and not have read anything, right? I mean, I immediately question that, right? So one way to not let school get in the way of your education is just to read more, right? And I guarantee everyone here that there are amazing, amazing, amazing recommendations that can come from your teachers at Lydian. These individuals are passionate about what they teach, and they know a whole lot more than just the curriculum that they're required to give you, right? And they know authors, and that's really what I want you to kind of, go and look for. Don't look for books, look for authors. If you find the right author, that's someone, who probably is leading in their space, right? Next, I know it sounds crazy, but it's to play more. And by play, I mean by play with your knowledge, right? We have all learned things, but it's this, what really impresses us is when students go out and experiment and they play with their knowledge, right? And the easiest example I can give is like a personal, project, if you will, similar to the one where a student went out and tried to light up the stop sign, right? They're really toying with what they already know, right? And what it does is the beautiful thing, it motivates you to go learn more, and collaborate with other people who maybe know things that you don't, right? So, I often find our relationship with knowledge is very, usually transactional in academic sense, right? We need to study this in order to pass this test, right? But what's really impressive from a love of learning standpoint is show me what you've really done with your knowledge, right? And yeah, I've already alluded to this, but the next point is to go find people who, who also share those same interests with you, right? But also differ from you in terms of your culture and background, right? Because from those people, you'll learn amazing things. And the best way to do this, guys, especially is I think, volunteering, right? Don't go volunteer in a setting that's easy. No. Like I said earlier, right? We want not just there to be an academic challenge. I want you to think about a challenge in terms of the activities that you take on too, right? Not over challenging, right? But choose a setting that will slightly put you out of your comfort zone, right? Whether that's working with neurodiverse children, right? Or that's working with veterans at the VA, right? Both of these, by the way, are examples of what our current students are doing every day. We have students right now who are volunteering and teaching, or just literally talking with other students in Ukraine, right? As part of this volunteer organization called Engine. You can contact us afterwards. Be more than happy to send you guys examples of this. But point is, go out there and meet people, because learning just doesn't just happen from classes or subjects. It happens from actual people who differ from you, right? And lastly, I just have to really stamp it out with this. Dare to solve problems, day-to-day problems, and in fact, a very healthy thing to do to maybe, spark motivation in your student's life. Or if you're a student right now listening to this, right, is literally, if you have a phone or whatever, make a list of problems you see in your day-to-day life. It could be the smallest things. Like, let me give you one that I noticed recently, right? My fiance loves plants. We have a lot of plants at home, but she doesn't know when they need to be watered. That's a problem. Now, you might be wondering, how is that relevant? Well, let me tell you something, right? Figuring out a way to detect moisture or water level in soil for each different pot sounds kind of like an environmental science experiment to me. Sounds kind of like a chemistry experiment to me. Sounds kind of like an engineering experiment to me. Sounds like a lot of different things to me, right? And so dare to go solve it, right? How do I, one, you have to identify the problems, but dare to actually go and say, well, I'm going to actually try to solve this, right? And so, don't, to recap is don't ultimately depend on just school for learning, right? I think, again, half of our time, really think about it that way. If I spend X number of hours on school, how do I spend almost some proportionate amount of time learning outside of school? What are those things that I can do? How do I read a bit more? How do I experiment with my knowledge a bit more? Maybe I can ask my instructor at Lydian about maybe different ideas they have about, the subject that I'm most interested in. And that's where you have some beautiful, well-rounded candidates, right? Students who have vast stories that not just involve knowledge, but most importantly, other people, right? From their communities, how they collaborated, how they met challenge. I had a student, I'll end it with this, created a physics club. Why? Student loved physics, and also student loved rockets. Did it, shoulder tapped a couple of friends to start the physics club with him. And the worst possible thing happened. He was the vice president. One of his friends was the president, and the president didn't want to do anything. Right? Didn't want to do anything. Right? Here, my student was trying to play with knowledge, get other people involved, collaborate and build a rocket. And now all of a sudden, his best friend just was the laziest team member. Right? Now, you might all think about this as a very bad experience. And let me tell you something. What I just told him about a week ago, I said, this might be the best thing that happened to you. Because it's not easy, it's hard. After, and there was a dramatic falling out, and there's a whole process there, right? That's probably still not over. But what my student gained from that was how to deal with difficult people. What it's like, right, to have to determine what's more important here, right? Integrity or friendship. These are life lessons, right? And ultimately, right, my student chose integrity. Had to tell his own friend that, hey, you got to get more involved here. You're the president. Everyone's looking up to you, but you're not doing anything, right? Those are the kinds of situations that I'm not saying that we should all try to run into and create, but I'm just saying, right, the fact that it was challenging now created a leadership opportunity, right? The fact that he was trying to play with knowledge, right, created this playful opportunity, right? The fact that ultimately my student was trying to empower others to learn how physics is applied in the real world demonstrated concern for others, right? You can hit all of those other, quality attributes, right? Only if you try to do things outside of class, right? This was not required by his physics class. It certainly wasn't. And so, I think even bad experiences, right? I oftentimes think are misconstrued, right? We usually think of them as things that we should avoid, but they're all learning experiences at the end of the day. So with all that being said, I think to recap my points is, one, stop competing and start contributing, right? Ask yourself, what can I do to make this community a slightly better place? Because by the way, college will ask you the same thing. Number two, right, is ultimately what impact do you hope to have? Right? What impact did you ultimately make? Not just on others, but on yourself, right? And that requires there to have been a challenge. And lastly, get out there, right? What Mark Twain said, don't let school get in the way of your education. And I'm not saying that Lydian is probably the best school you could possibly go to get an actual proper education, let me be honest, right? But there's a whole world out there that students have yet to be exposed to. And I think coming out of COVID now, especially as, the situation seems to have been stabilized, I think this is a great opportunity, right, to identify what are those things that school can't teach our students that maybe we can get them involved in, right? And so, yeah, again, 50-50, right? 50% is comes down to, yeah, sure, how much did you challenge yourself and how did you do, right? And the other 50 is, well, ultimately, what kind of community member will you be if I were to have you here, right? And I just want to really emphasize that point of balance, right? Every single decision you make with your time when it comes to a high schooler's development has to come down to that sense of balance, right? Are we overwhelming them? Do they have enough time to grow and be, a human being and experience more than just, coursework, but actually get out there and see what's out there, see who else is out there, right? See what they can do with their knowledge. That's when life gets really, really interesting and very inspiring, most importantly. And that's when we see students do their absolute best and get into the very best universities, when they start seeing that how much they can actually start doing now, both at school and, to the early point outside of school. So anyway,
Dan, I want to ask that I've been dying to ask you this question, but I want to let you finish your segment. This is about your segment specifically.
Sure.
At Lydian, as a rolling admissions school, we will often, bring students into the high school program for the first time, second semester, sophomore year, maybe it's already junior year. They've been in another setting, they've been struggling. They get here, they start to turn things around. But looking at it from a college application standpoint, that's a late bloomer. That's a student that struggled early on. They're starting to turn it around. And I often get the question, and so does Elizabeth, should I apply to colleges in the fall of my senior year, or should I take a gap year strategically because I want to get involved non-academically to show that I am maturing, that I am getting lived experience? And will that help my chances if I do that and then apply during my gap year to the university level? Does this make sense? We get asked this all the time, and I think it's a really good question. How do you assess whether to go for it your senior year, or maybe you're going to get that diploma, you're going to continue that positive momentum, and you're going to do something really meaningful in that gap year, something that is going to make an impact? And will that make a difference for their college application process? So that's my question, because we hear it all the time. And I want to defer to the experts to shed a little light on that question, because I think it's a good one.
So I'll offer some thoughts. I'm really curious to see what Julian's thoughts are on this, because I think a gap year is already a special circumstance. But my initial thought is 10th grade is not late bloomer. There are two, I would say, general successful tracks that we admit, right, to the likes of a Berkeley or an Irvine or an LA or an Emory University or whatnot. And it is what I call the flatline 4, right, where a student was consistently doing well, and they've also been, demonstrating various quality attributes outside of class consistently, right? And then there's the positive trajectory, right? And if a student just kind of started getting on track in 10th grade, I think that's perfect timing, right? I think where it's a little bit more dangerous is if a student, had a really rough 9th and 10th grade, right? And 11th grade in their first semester, they're still trying to get their bearings straight, but it's starting to kind of bud there. That's when it might be a little bit too late. And that's when I would probably strongly consider that gap year to really continue to build that positive trajectory, right? I think a trajectory generally constitutes 3 or more semesters, I think in general, right? And so mind you, right, that college applications are due the first semester senior year, right? So we don't usually get to see what happened the first part of senior year. So hence, if you kind of backtrack that 3 semesters, right, we're looking at second half of 10th grade and all of 11th grade. So if a student hasn't really started that trajectory at the second half of 10th grade yet, then yeah, I think it's fair to say a gap year might be really useful. Now, one point of caution on the gap year, because we've had students who've done it. I've had students who've gone to college and done it, by the way. Okay, so it doesn't just have to be between high school and college. But one really important point of caution is the student has to have a solid, concrete, specific game plan and be self-motivated. If a student doesn't have a solid, concrete game plan and aren't self-motivated, it's going to be a disaster of a gap year.
But I can't just stay home and play video games, Dan. That would constitute a gap year.
Unfortunately, you can't. Yeah, I mean, as good as Roblox and Fortnite are. Go ahead, Julian. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Well, I think every student's circumstance, everybody has a unique circumstance. Everybody is different. And I think in those, I completely agree with Dan. And I think if that does happen to a student, that's something that they need to address in their application. Mm-hmm. So it can't just be like, surprise, I didn't do well. And then I see an upward trajectory, and that's wonderful. That's great. But I want to see what happened. Was there like a unique circumstance? And even if it was just something like, I wasn't motivated, mm-hmm. You can make that a story, but you have to find the way to make that a story. And if you weren't motivated, how did you become motivated? Mm-hmm. What brought about that motivation? And what have you been doing now to stay motivated? And did you find anything you're passionate about? So like that stuff needs to be addressed in their application. Otherwise it ends on a big question mark. And it's like, well, it's like I see a trajectory, but you didn't address, and students do that all the time. They'll get C's and D's, and then they'll start getting straight A's. And I'm like, okay, I see the upward trajectory, but
What happened?
then there's nothing that you told me about
Yeah.
why you got those
Yeah.
grades or why that happened.
Very
So
true.
make sure that if that happens to a student, they're unfolding the whole story as opposed to only letting me read chapter 1. And then, the book just never finishes after that. So
Sure.
And we'll talk more about this, I think, during the summer workshop, because there's specific areas on the application where you're supposed to write about these kinds of things. But,
So I want to put another plug in to families that I saw some families joined us a little late. They were in the middle of the presentation. As a reminder, we will have Readyedgego with us on July 28th and 29th during the summer. We are fortunate to have them for 2 days, and they're going to be doing a 3-hour workshop on each of those days. One of those days, it's going to be the do's and don'ts of the application process, looking at that holistically. The second day, though, to Dan's point right now, talking about those personal statements and how do you approach, the way you're presenting yourself to an admissions committee in your personal statement. I think that's going to be very valuable, not just from a writing standpoint in terms of the nuts and bolts of writing, but from a strategy standpoint, and just like trying to, I think, make the best of that opportunity, because you're presenting yourself to the committee in a way in that personal statement that's not just numbers. We can calculate GPAs, we can look at test scores all day long, but that's your chance to draw that reader in and show them who you are and make a statement. So for those of you who may be interested, take a look at our summer website. The registration portal is up, so you can sign up for this workshop now. It's on the 28th and 29th. I just wanted to say that one more time because I saw we had a few people jump in a little bit late to the presentation. Julian, there were 2 questions for you. Can I read them? They're in the chat.
Sure.
Can I?
Ask
So the first question was about those school scores you were talking about at the very beginning. The question is, are those school scores public?
No. So if you were to ask me what Lydian scores, I don't know. And that is because I only get scores for the specific schools that I read. Every year it's different. Every year I'm given a different territory. And I've actually tried researching what the school scores would be. And I believe the College Board is working on a way to get those scores public. I don't know when it's going to happen, but I've tried some research on my own. I wasn't able to find scores, but if you look up, I think a way to kind of give yourself a ballpark range of if you're looking for scores, try, I suppose, looking up the general area that you live in and see, see maybe crime rates or see, that's something that's big. So see kind of how your city is scored in terms of safety, in terms of opportunity. But again, keep an eye out for College Board, maybe even research a little bit into College Board and look up like high school context scoring through College Board. I know I saw on their website that they're working on something. Not sure when it'll be done though.
I can ballpark it. Look, I'll just try. I'm just going to go on a limb and just say I think it's going to be 20. Yeah. Plus or minus, call it 15 if you want, right? But I think not even looking at crime rates, but just looking at nearby schools. I think that's probably all you need to do.
Yep.
Second question, Julian, this was again in your section. You were talking about course selection and you gave us 3 examples of students.
Yes.
And you were talking a little bit about, depth of taking weighted courses, like knowing you're going into a certain major in college. Like there was the biology major, so they were taking honors in AP in chemistry, biology, environmental science. Like that all made a lot of sense. The question here is, what about those kids that don't know what they want to do when they get to college? Are they going to be penalized for not knowing like what area they should maybe have a little bit more depth in when it comes to those weighted courses? What would you recommend? Like this is truly a student that has no clue what they're going to major in when they get to college. What's the recommendation there? What's the best practice?
If you don't necessarily know what your major is, and a lot of people worry about doing this, going in undeclared is not a bad thing. That's something that I would recommend. If you really, really don't know, explore. And look, here's the thing that happens with kids that do apply undeclared. They go in as undeclared, but then there's no exploration anywhere in any of your general interests. So it's like, you're going in undeclared, but I want to see at least some area of interest. So say you are going in undeclared, right? I would at least pick out 3 areas that you're interested in, be it social justice, political science, and X. And at least start taking some courses that are going to give you some insight into what you're doing. Now, there are times where, you know, a student they don't have an idea, but if you're going to be specific about your major, like bio, then I want to see why you're interested in that major. Like you want to show me at least some general interest in the major. But if you truly don't know, again, I don't think undeclared is a bad idea, but if you are doing undeclared, start exploring. Take opportunities in the summer to take a psychology course. Maybe you'll like it. Maybe you'll realize, you know what, that wasn't necessarily for me. And I don't think that's a bad thing, but I think it will give you a general direction of where to go and where your interests might lie after that. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, not knowing what you want to major in is completely okay. And that's it's completely okay, because you have until the sophomore year of college to figure it out what you want to actually declare for your degree. So it's okay. However, what is not okay is for you to sit on your table and play video games all the time and not demonstrate any level of learning, right? I think ultimately what Julian is trying to say is you have to still demonstrate curiosity, and that has to manifest itself in some way, shape, or form. And I want to end my statement by saying this, right? Most colleges don't let you apply undeclared, undecided. When you apply undeclared, you still have to choose the college that you want to undeclare for. So that could be undeclared engineering, undeclared social sciences, undeclared letters and science, undeclared something, right? Some colleges do allow you to go undeclared, undecided, meaning I don't know what I want. I don't know what part of the university, right? But most of them still require you to choose an area. And so to Julian's point, you might not know what you want to major in, but you still have to demonstrate curiosity outside of class in some area. Yeah.
Yeah, and there was just another comment about that. I think, I don't know if it's safe to say this, Dan and Julian, but what I'm hearing is we've talked a lot tonight about depth and meaning, like finding meaning in things, right? And so to me, I may not know yet what I'm going to major in or what program I want to declare, going to a certain university, but I can feel within myself if I have an interest in something. And if I feel like I have an interest in something, maybe pursuing more depth in that area, taking maybe a weighted course in that arena, but not taking the AP Euro course just because my friend's taking AP Euro and I am not interested at all in AP European history. Like, to me, it would be better to take the AP Euro honors course in that area that I feel like I have some interest in. Would you say that this is a fair statement? It's really those things, like not just saying, oh, I'm going to take 6 AP and honors courses. Well, why? Because I'm supposed to. Well, that's not really the right reason to be doing this, right? So I think part of it is just really paying attention to those areas where your curiosity is being piqued, and like explore that. It doesn't mean you have to major in it when you get to be a college student, but why not pursue that a little bit deeper? I don't know. That's kind of how I'm synthesizing a lot of what I've heard tonight. It's really about finding that meaning and exploring those passions and interests.
I'll just add a simple point. I've worked with students for 16 years of my life, and not once have I worked with a student who's violated the following 2 rules, gotten away with it. One, right? When a student, so if a student's thinking about taking a weighted course, could be AP Euro, could be AP Environmental Science, could be AP World, could be whatever. First question I ask is, are you interested in the course? And if there's any hesitation, right? No, we're not taking that course, right? Because if a student is not interested in the course, it will take them 3 times longer to just stay afloat, right? Which then drags their time required for the other courses that they actually probably do want to do. And the second question I ask, and this is an and statement. So if the answer for the first question was yes, which is, are you interested? And let's say it's yes. The second question is, do you know for sure you're going to get an A? And this is probably the one that I'd say families always mess up on, right? There tends to be this, as you alluded to, Jonathan, it's this sense of, I need to take more weighted courses. I need to show that I challenge myself. But at what cost, right? And here's the 2 costs that parents just don't take into account enough, right? Which is, one, if a student takes weighted courses and does not excel, that does not prove your aptitude. right? It actually hurts you more than it helps you. And then secondly, right, is ultimately like, do we have enough time to do the other non-academic things? That's the key, right? An ultra marathon runner once, and I love to quote her. She said, "Just because you can doesn't mean you should." I've had many students take 5 or 6 APs in a single year. They self-studied for more sometimes. But guess what? Okay, sure. Let's say they got an A in every course, which by the way, almost never happens, but let's say they did. Well, guess what? They don't have enough time to have shown leadership, demonstrate concern, and curiosity outside the classroom. And that's where, boom, right? You can be a perfect academic student with 20 AP courses, but still only fill half the cup. And that's the biggest, I would say, paradigm shift that's really required, I think, in today's society, right? Because we're so focused on the course rigor and grades that we miss the other half.
And I've seen that very often this year. Like, students will take tons of, like, a completely full course load of weighted courses. That's wonderful that you got A's. That's great. But then you go to activities and it's like there's a tumbleweed blowing through the activity section because they haven't done anything. And you're like, well,
right,
what happened?
Right.
So
right.
I just want to share this example for families that are here tonight from Lydian. If you go to our blog section of the website, you'll read about Shay. Shay is a senior at the Menlo Park campus. He's been with us since 9th grade and had a bumpy road starting out, got engaged, started to get his confidence back, began taking a few weighted classes each year, not 5 or 6 every year, Dan, but like, maybe 1 or 2, and developing his rhythm academically. But what did he do? He used to play basketball in elementary and middle school very competitively. We don't have a basketball team at Lydian. So what did he do? He got out into the local community and he started a movement to raise money for children from underprivileged communities who wanted to play sports but didn't have the means, didn't have the equipment, didn't have the resources. So Shay started to get involved in this, and he became, recognized for this in the local community. And then it became national, but that was after he really got deeply involved in the local community first.
Yeah.
And I would say academically, is he the strongest student that's ever come through Lydian? No.
Yeah.
Did he get accepted to Cornell early action this year? Yes. But I'm using this as an example because he didn't go crazy with the academics. He did strategically select some weighted courses each year. And I think he did a good job with that balance of choosing, but he had time and bandwidth to get involved in the community. And he did that. And he got involved in an area that he felt very committed to and very passionate about. So, I hope it's okay I use that example. I don't think I'm outing Shay. I think he'll be fine with me saying it. He's on our website on the blog section. So, but yeah, he found out he got into Cornell. And I mean, it's not so much what school did the person get into, like Cornell or UC Davis or UC San, it doesn't matter. But to me, the lesson there is he found a way to balance these things. And Dan, I think it speaks to your half of the presentation as well as to Julian's, right? Yeah. And so I think it's important. And I think that it's somehow overlooked in the Silicon Valley sometimes because the academics are so heavily prioritized that the other stuff is not as prioritized all the time. And I just think, if we can help at Lydian parents, if you're here tonight, like if Elizabeth, myself, Christiana can meet with your students or you and talk about like, what's a good game plan? What can we do over the summer? What can we think about for next year? It doesn't just have to be course selection. I think we can think bigger picture. And Dan, I have a question for you. Like if families reach out to us, because they're going to see this presentation tonight and they say to us, we would like to get our student involved this summer doing something non-academic, something meaningful, or maybe it is academic. Maybe it's like a co-curricular or something. Like, do you have any advice as to where to point people initially? Like summer seems to me to be a ripe opportunity for students to pursue things that are not just your typical classroom school day, right? Like in the summer, there's a lot of things you can do from community service to getting internships to doing a lot of other kinds of things. Like, what would you suggest if we get questions about that? Is there a place we can point them?
So I'm going to start with the framework, then I'll give specific examples. I'll be decently fast, right? The first thing, the framework goes like this. Any student over the summer, and we've been teaching our students to do this for the last 10 plus years. This is the framework, okay? Learn something, try something, serve something. Learn something, try something, serve something. Now here's what it means, right? A student over the summer should try to do all three. One, learn something means, how do I advance my knowledge in an area that I already know I like? Let's say a student wants to go pre-med, or let's say a student is thinking about law, or let's say a student's thinking about going cog sci, or whatever it is, right? Ask them, okay, what is one thing I can do to advance it a bit further? Summer programs are an excellent way to do this, right? And specifically, my favorite around town has to be UC Berkeley ATDP. It's quite cost effective, and it's also, it comes with the UC Berkeley brand name. There are a ton of different opportunities to learn internships and classes at Stanford. UCLA also has a phenomenal residential program. SCIP is what it's called, or pre-college summer institutes, right? That's one way to do it, but you don't have to pay an arm and a leg for those kinds of programs if you don't want to. You could just literally help a student learn by reading personal projects, but just some way, shape, or form, learn something. How do I advance my current knowledge? Second one is try something, right? What is something that a student has always wanted to try but has never gotten a chance to, right? I think this is very important to keep a student motivated to learn, right? I mean, the world's a beautiful place. There's so many things, and it doesn't have to be academic. It could just be literally be, oh, I always want to learn how to play the ukulele. Let's go do it, right? And if you don't have the money to afford a ukulele teacher, go to YouTube. I guarantee you'll find some amazing teachers there, right? There's no excuses nowadays, right? And the last one is to go serve something, right? Choose a social issue that makes you angry, right? What is the thing that just, you get mad about, right? Well, guys, volunteermatch.org, okay? Look it up. Excellent way to get started, right? You can look at opportunities in your area. If you're COVID phobic, then you can always look at virtual opportunities, right? Don't make the excuse, right? Don't make the excuse that, oh, I didn't know where to look. No, I'm telling you right now, this is how we go, right? So I think, if a student gets to do all three of those things, they're going to have a great time over the summer. They're going to feel like they didn't waste it. And secondly, the beauty is they'll actually probably have a lot of time left over to hang out with their friends, to get sleep, to even study for the upcoming school year, right? Maybe prepare for the SAT, which we didn't even touch today, which is fine, right? But point is, if you just follow that framework, you'll be in good shape. And then I would argue that I think in general, any point in one's life, we should always be asking ourselves the same three questions. How can I learn more? What can I try, right? And ultimately, right, well, how do I serve? I think if at any point in our lives, if we're doing all three of those three things, I think we're living a pretty good life. So it starts now, right, as a teenager. So I hope that answers the question of how to get started with some very specific examples. Oh, and by the way, my favorite one on the peninsula in terms of how to get started with serving, if you're brand new, let's say your student has never served before, look for the local Boys and Girls Club. Mm-hmm. Look for the local YMCA, the Y. Those are excellent places that are more than happy to take volunteers usually, right? But what's interesting I found over the years of working with students is they don't, they probably never heard of stuff like that before, right? And so, and those volunteer organizations, granted, they don't really do a great job publicizing themselves, right? Because they're so under-resourced already, right? So if you're not sure where to start, those are usually a good place to go. Yeah.
And if you like animals, you might consider your local SPCA. I actually know a couple along the peninsula organizations that our Lydian students have worked at where it made a really big impact. So any animal lovers out there, that's another area you might think about.
Yeah, and I just wanted to kind of loop back to what you said earlier, the Silicon Valley, and I think in general, the world, it's easy to kind of focus all on academics because it's measurable, and I think what we've been able to produce actually is something called Go Path, and we're actually going to invite all Lydian families who are interested in actually measuring the other side, right? Which is, okay, half of the bar right here is academics, right? But how do I stand when it comes to curiosity outside the classroom or love of learning? How do I stand when it comes to leadership experience? How do I stand when it comes to demonstrating concern for others? We actually created this platform to basically show you how a college admissions reader would evaluate you on quality attributes as well as your quantity ones, right? And so, I think after this presentation, I'll go ahead and send a link, to all the folks at Lydian. But we really want to shed light on how that other ambiguous side works, because it turns out you can actually measure it. You can measure quality attributes, and that sounds crazy, but we've been using this for years now, and it's literally crazy how accurate the data system is. And so, we'll grant access to everyone after this meeting, and help you see and understand how exactly college readers look at things like curiosity outside the classroom. Yeah.
For our Lydian families, I want you to know there's some context behind this meeting and our summer workshop, which is a bigger picture idea of Lydian really partnering in a more formal way with Readyedgego. I think this college counseling arm is a really important piece, and we're lucky that internally we have Elizabeth George, our Dean of Curriculum and Guidance Services, who supports our first semester seniors, our second semester juniors, walks them through that college application process, reminds them of their deadlines, all those things. Elizabeth is not a certified college counselor outside, you know, she's an educator, she's a teacher, but it's a passion that she has and she loves doing it. But we've been talking more internally about how do we deepen this area of service for Lydian? And I think that this is a real opportunity here. And Dan, I would just ask you and your team, if we have families that want to just reach out to you, maybe they want to consult, maybe they have some specific questions about their situation, you know, what's the best way to do that? We want to make sure that we're giving, you know, Readyedgego out there as a resource. And this is great what you're offering us, so thank you. But I want to make sure we know how to connect people to you if that comes up in conversation.
Well, yeah, I mean, we can actually leave you guys with our emails right here, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I mean, right after this, you know, I think, look, the way we approach families and students specifically, I'll just be honest, we're very student centric, you know, and our motto is one student at a time. You know, I think every single student deserves to be loved and cherished and really, I think, inspired, you know, and I think that's really what makes the partnership with Lydian so special, because I know Lydian is passionate about that, you know, inspiring each individual student with individual care. I mean, that's exactly how we see things here. So if anyone is interested, and that's not just about utilizing services, but just learning, you know, sometimes just having a virtual coffee or something and just talking about a student beyond just the academics, right? We're here, you know, we're actual human beings, and you know, we didn't get into this space to just get kids into college. We got into this space to inspire kids to be everything they want to be, you know. And so feel free, you know, just reach out via email to either you know, me or Julian. Both of us, we'd be more than happy to talk.
Well, thank you. And I want to say thank you to all the parents that were on the call tonight and other folks, Lydian or not Lydian. You know, we appreciate you being here. I hope that you learned as much as I did through this presentation. And if anyone would like the link to this Zoom recording after tonight, just reach out to us here. I'll put my Elizabeth, I'm going to put our email addresses here in the chat, okay, in case there are people that don't know us internally. Let us know. We'll send you the link. Dan will send you and your team the link as well. And you know, I would just encourage you to share the recording internally with people that might be interested. I want to promote Dan's team and Julian as much as possible, because I think that right now there's really a need. There's a lot of changes in the college application landscape. Like there's things now, you know, test optional schools, test blind schools, like the whole standardized testing process is changing. There's more and more applications every year to the schools that 20 years ago when I was applying were like target schools, and now they're reach schools. Like, I just think families are trying and students are trying to figure out, like, how do I get sort of a one-up on this process in an ethical way, right? Like, what do I need to do to separate myself and differentiate myself? And I think that Dan, you might agree that it's important that students are starting to think about this earlier than like maybe we were taught. Like, you know, we were often told, oh, start thinking about college apps when you're a junior in high school. But it's really like, actually, no, when you're in middle school or ninth grade, like there's so much you can be doing to make an impact that's really going to benefit you when you're then applying to colleges later on. And I think that that's like a shift, right? This isn't just a 1 semester or 1 year window where you're applying to schools. It's really the whole story that you're telling about yourself. Yep. So anyway, I find this to be incredibly valuable. And Dan and Julian, thank you for making the time tonight to be here with us. You guys were great.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
It was a pleasure. Absolutely. And we look forward to, you know, shedding as much more insight as we can. So we'll keep you guys posted with if we're seeing a lot of the same questions and topics. Maybe we can do this again.
Thanks so much.
All right, guys. Take care.
Thank you. Have a good night.